You're listening to a podcast by the Center for Action and Contemplation. To learn more, visit cac.org.
Hi, everyone. It's Brian. One of the assumptions that guide us in making learning how to see is that we really learn best together in conversation, in community, and by asking questions we can't answer alone. I have a favor to ask. If this podcast has been helpful to you, would you consider leaving a rating or review wherever you listen? That small gesture helps other spiritual seekers find their way here, and it helps us grow the community of people learning how to see and learning how to love. And please keep your questions coming. Your questions guide us, and they help us feel connected as fellow learners. You can always reach us at podcasts@cac.org. Hi, I'm Brian McLaren.
And I'm Carmen Acevedo Butcher, and welcome to Learning How to See. As the podcast name suggests, this podcast is about seeing.
Each season, we explore some facet of learning how to see, learning to encounter reality, not just superficially with our eyes, but deeply with our whole being.
And this season, we're exploring what it means to see with eyes of love.
Thank you for trusting us with this time, and thank you for being the kind of person who cares about learning how to see with eyes of love.
In today's episode, we'll be joined by Parker Palmer, author, speaker, activist, and founder of the Center for Courage and Renewal, and we'll be considering the topic, Loving When We're Not at Our Best.
Then, after our interview with Parker Palmer, Carmen will offer a brief reflection about our interview, and then we'll lead you in a guided meditation, concluding with a few minutes of silent contemplation. It is our hope and prayer that after our time together, you will feel recentered on what really matters, and that you will open your eyes with a deeper sense of love for all that you encounter. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad you're with us. It really is a great step of trust that you have made to join us for this podcast, and we hope you're going to find it as meaningful and inspiring as we believe it's going to be, because we have one of my favorite guests we've ever had on the podcast today, and that's Parker J. Palmer. We're so glad you're with us, Parker. I know, Carmen, you've read a lot of Parker's books. You want to say anything about some of your favorites?
Oh, I would love to. The one, Parker, where I first met you really was Let Your Life Speak. And it really was a great help to me bringing that Quaker wisdom. And I've just followed you ever since and read so many of them, On the Brink of Everything. And you have such a calm and quiet way of helping us listen. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to both of you. It's just a delight to be here. Brian, Carmen, two wonderful colleagues on the road. So I'm glad for this chance to talk.
That's right. Well, thank you. I can't remember which the first of your books that I came across was. It was either A Hidden Wholeness or Let Your Life Speak, but so many of your books have been helpful to me. You know, I'll say one other thing, actually two. One of them is, through the years, I met so many people who really I had wonderful conversations with. And I'd find out one thing they had in common is they had participated in one of the circles of trust that you initiated through the Center for Courage and Renewal. It just strikes me what a beautiful legacy that is of teaching people how to hold space and listen and speak from the heart. And then I should also mention, years ago, I came across an article of yours called Divided No More. That was an article for educators, but it has shown up in so much of my work because you talk about movements and how movements begin and develop. And one of my all-time favorite quotes of yours is, you speak about the genius of movements is paradoxical. They abandon the logic of organizations in order to gather the power necessary to rewrite the logic of organizations. That explains so much of what I think goes on in the world. So I'm among the many indebted.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Parker, in this season of Learning How to See, we're talking about the quality of love that we bring to our seeing, to not assume that seeing is sort of neutral and then we might add a little love flavor to it, but to understand that we can actually develop a habit of the heart, so to speak, of bringing love to our seeing. And before we get into some specifics about that, anything come to mind from you, your own life and work that you would want to say about that general subject?
Well, I think it's a wonderful orientation. And the first thing that crossed my mind, Brian, was the fact that surely living with the mind of Christ is living with eyes that see through love. That has to be right at the core of gospel living, rightly understood as I understand it. And I also think, and this is something I work on a lot every day, have for a long time, that it has a lot to do with what it is we pay attention to. In a way, love is a kind of filter that, or a lens that directs our attention to some things and away from others, because there's a lot to see out there. And it takes no genius to see the darkness that's around us all the time. But love is a form of genius, and love allows us to see the light. From a Quaker point of view, that's a critical thing to see because we're always striving to walk in the light and to walk toward the light and to assist the light in its long-term mission of overcoming what George Fox called the sea of darkness. So I've learned a lot from my Buddhist friends about paying attention and what it is you pay attention to and how much that can shape your seeing and therefore your living.
If a person knew nothing about Quakers except thought that they were the originators of oats or something, and they didn't know of this idea of an attentiveness to the light or the light that shines in everyone, I wonder, could you, as a Quaker, try to help people understand that special gift and insight of Quakerism?
It's a gift that has really moved me when, again, it's rightly understood in context. What draws me to Quakerism is the holding of a kind of paradox. On the one hand, Quakers teach, believe, and act upon the notion that everyone has that of God in them, often translated as an inner teacher or an inner light. So within each of us, Quakers believe, is a source of truth, which is always calling to us. Love, truth, and justice, always calling to us. Those are particular manifestations of the light that is within every human being. But we also know that it's very easy for people to get confused about signals coming from within. It's not a slam dunk to say, okay, this is what God is telling me, and therefore I'm going to go do it, because that has motivated some horrendous acts in history. And so the other pole of the Quaker paradox is that Quakers over 350 years have cultivated forms of community that are basically aimed at helping people discern between the light and the darkness, that are aimed at helping people sort out what's the wheat and what's the chaff. You know, what are the voices of truth and what are the voices of greed or of ego or of fear or other forms of falsehood within me. And that to me has been absolutely critical. And it's worth noting historically that the branch of Quakerism that has been most formative for me, that has most profoundly shaped my life, is the so-called unprogrammed branch, or the silent meeting branch, as it's sometimes called. And that's a branch of Quakerism that dates back to its earliest forms, where Quakers had no clergy. There's an old Quaker saying that I like a lot. They say, we are accused of abolishing the clergy, but that's not true. We abolished the laity. I like that a
I
lot
love that.
because it says the truth. It says that all of us are called, if we're called to community, we're called to lead and we're called to follow simultaneously. And for Quakers, the discernment that used to be done in the privacy of the pastor's study, where you would go in and say, help me understand what's right, what's wrong, that had to be done in community, in forms of sifting and winnowing, would be the agricultural metaphor. sifting and winnowing what you think you're hearing from within. It's a community where people don't tell you what you must believe, but they help you find what is the trustworthy voice within yourself, not just once, but time and time again. Because what I trusted yesterday may be a different voice than the one I'm hearing today, with new pressures and new challenges and new threats to my identity and integrity. It's more complicated than just listen for some inward leading and then go thou and do likewise.
So helpfully explained, and bringing us to that paradox quickly, I think is great. I want to turn it over to Carmen in a minute, but I have to say, as you were speaking, I thought of a friend of mine. I imagine you know Diana Butler Bass.
Oh, yes, I do. Yes. Great respect for her work.
Diana will have to forgive me if I've got this part of this story wrong, but she did some research on her ancestors years ago and found out that one of her ancestors was a member of a Quaker meeting who was put out of the Quaker meeting because he was a slaveholder. And they wanted him to come to a place of accepting that slavery was wrong. And he was unwilling or unable to do that. And whether I've got any of the details of the story wrong, we can imagine that happened many times in American history. And it speaks of this challenge that, along with the inner voice of the Spirit, the inner light of God that might be trying to bring us to some understanding and bring us to love as our prime directive, so to speak. There are voices in our culture that are also shaping us, and conspiracies between those voices of our culture and fears and desires and resentments and so on within us that can then make us be unwilling to hear that light. And I think this is one of our challenges in love. So often we might be doing our best to be following that light, but we're with people who seem to oppose everything we stand for. Could you say something about what it means for us to see those people with eyes of love?
That's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because in our immediate experience, those are the people who are trying to pull us away from our most deeply felt and held inward truths. I think for me, it comes down to something fairly simple in a paradoxical way, which is that before I want to debate anyone about their political or ideological commitments, before I want to get into an argument about belief at that level of abstraction, I want to learn the life story of the person I'm talking to. I want to know what forces have shaped him or her in a way that will help me understand what it is they believe. The big picture for me in this, and I'm certainly not the first one to say it, but I value this way of looking at it, is that I want to create a relational container, even with those I perceive as my enemies, that is strong enough to hold an ongoing discourse about true and false, right and wrong, good and bad, because those are complicated issues. If I'm honest about it, it's not always as clear as the nose on my face where I need to come down on some of those issues. And when I can better understand the biographical context out of which a person is speaking, I'll give you an example. A few months ago, troubled by some of the theological claims that this particular person, this evangelical pastor, was putting online in relation to his congregation. He had mounted an argument that because judges shouldn't, in biblical terms, rule over kings, judges in the American judicial system shouldn't try to stop our president from doing whatever he wants. I had serious problems with that as a citizen, as a Christian, and as just a human being who tries to exercise a modicum of common sense. And so I reached out to him. I happened to know that he had done good work in the community. I thanked him for his good work in the community because we're always more complex than just any one dimension of our lives, right? Certainly, I have dimensions of my life on which I'd hate to be judged terminally without somebody taking in the whole three-dimensional picture. I reached out to him thanking him for his work, but saying at the same time, that I was really struggling as to what the theological or biblical rationale for his position on the courts in American democracy might be. He responded online and said, well, I'd be glad to talk about that, but it's pretty hard to do it in a text-based conversation. Maybe we could get on Zoom. I appreciated the generosity of that response because I was nobody in his world, right? I reached back to him and I said, well, I'd love to have that conversation. How about having it at my home instead of on Zoom? So on one fine spring afternoon, he came over for coffee and we talked for about 2 hours. And up front, I said, I really don't want to start with the theological or biblical materials. I want to talk about our lives. If you're willing, I'm willing. And he was willing. So he told me his story, I told him mine. And at several points, I said to him, I'm tearing up here because I'm hearing parallels to my story that I could not have imagined before we talked. And I'll tell you what some of those parallels are. In both cases, we had made mid-course corrections, major mid-course corrections to our vocational trajectory that were totally misunderstood by friends and family and colleagues who thought we were just insane. And it's possible that either one or both of us was, but that's neither here nor there for purposes of this conversation. We did touch on theological issues. I think he was at least a little surprised to learn that I knew about Ananias and Sapphira in the Bible. And we have this treasure in earthen vessels and a few other things that might have not quite fit his caricature, perhaps, of who I was. And I was certainly surprised by things about his life that did not fit my caricature of who he was. Did either of us change our minds about the issue at hand? No, I don't think so. But for me, I know for a certainty that conversation changed the way I look at people that I put in categories in such a facile and unreflective. And that story helps me push back on the lesser angels of my own nature every time I meet such a moment. Maybe one thing we can say about looking at the world through eyes of love is that it sometimes just takes the form of open-minded, open-hearted curiosity. This is an amazing world. Let me learn more about it. People are amazing. Let me learn more about them. I think I have, by this time, so many stories to tell about people who, when I look at them a little more deeply, I see something that joins us and something I don't want to break.
That's a beautiful story, Parker. And what I appreciate about it, too, is the fact that it took time. I mean, it's not fast. Making this relational container that you talk about really takes time to listen to someone else. One of the things I try to do, I teach at a university, is tell the students you can argue somebody about policy, but you can't argue someone else's experience. And so respect literally means to look again. And I love your idea of let's be curious because the world is really amazing and people are amazing. I know you have a lot of stories also about what we do when we experience those times where we do kind of rush in or make a decision where, we just sort of fail, or we're experiencing some kind of trauma, or we're living with some kind of illness. And I wanted to read back to you, if you don't mind, some of your words from Let Your Life Speak, because you talk about seasons. And this one is a passage. It starts like this. Our inward winters take many forms: failure, betrayal, depression, death. But every one of them, in my experience, yields to the same advice. The winters will drive you crazy until you learn to get out into them, until we enter boldly into the fears we most want to avoid. Those fears will dominate our lives. But when we walk directly into them, protected from frostbite by the warm garb of friendship, or inner discipline or spiritual guidance, we can learn what they have to teach us. Then we discover once again that the cycle of the seasons is trustworthy and life-giving, even in the most dismaying season of all. And I wondered if you could share with us a story about this or just say a bit more about it.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for unpacking the word respect as to look again. I'd never thought about that, but that's brilliant. That'll be the topic of the next book.
Excellent.
I remember writing that passage, and I remember as I did it, I think thinking a lot about my own experience with clinical depression, which is something I've written about over the years. I've written, as other folks have, about the different ways our hearts can break, knowing that, as I do at age 86, life is itself heartbreaking, especially if one is inclined to love anyone or anything. Hearts break pretty often, pretty easily. But there are two ways for the heart to break. It can break apart into a million shards and lie useless on the floor. Often these days, getting hurled as a fragment grenade at the ostensible source of its pain before it falls to the floor. Not a good scenario for anyone at any point. The resilient heart, the supple heart, and I think a lot about how to make my heart more supple. That heart can break open into a larger capacity so that when serious illness or death strikes, we find ourselves amazingly, after struggle and after a long time underground, amazingly sort of more open to life, more generous, more understanding. That's the story of so many folks I know who've lost the most precious person in their lives and go into a long underground period of grieving, but then wake up one morning realizing that they're better friends, they're better grandparents, they're better parents, they're better neighbors, they're more understanding, they're more compassionate, not in spite of the heartbreak, but because of it. And I think in a lot of ways, the core Christian story is about how to hold your heart in a way that allows it to break open rather than apart. To me, that's the cruciform life. That's the center of the cross where things are pulled right and left, up and down into a larger and larger opening until all of the life experience can pass through. My own experience of depression, which I used to talk about as being lost in the dark, I now think that that's inaccurate. If you're just lost in the dark, there's a difference between you and the darkness, and you can feel your way around and maybe find a light switch or a window shade or a door handle or something to get a little relief. But depression in its depths is more, I think, like having become the dark, where there's no difference between you and the darkness and thus no room to negotiate it. It's always been hard for me to say, what does one do during depression in order to maybe survive, let alone thrive? And the initial answer for me is hang on, just hang on out of some kind of tenacious animal instinct. And I came to understand the human soul as that wild animal that is somewhere back there in the thickets of the wilderness with very little to eat. But like a wild animal, it can survive on very little. It is tenacious if you can trust it and sort of allow it to keep doing its work on you. In one of my bouts with depression, I found great help from a spiritually based therapist that I worked with who never tried to sort of import, religious wisdom from someplace outside, but kept working with my experience in ways that helped me reframe it. And at one point he said, after listening to me for a long time, he said, "Parker, it sounds like you image depression as the hand of an enemy trying to crush you into the ground." He said, maybe it would be possible for you to re-image this depression as the hand of a friend trying to press you down to ground on which it's safe to stand. So from an enemy trying to crush you to a friend trying to press you down to ground on which it's safe to stand. And while that image didn't fix me overnight, that's not the way life works, it planted a sense of possibility in me that has become very important to me, because I realized eventually that I had been living my life at altitude, intellectual altitude, spiritual altitude, ego altitude, privilege altitude. And when you live at altitude, thinking you're among the saved, or you're smarter than everything else, or your ego is too big to let anything happen to it, when you live at altitude and you trip and fall, as we do with some regularity, you have a long, long way to fall. And you might well kill yourself. But if you are on the ground, you trip and fall, you do what all the rest of us do. You get up, brush yourself off, and carry on until you fall again, and then you get up again. And I learned through that process about trying to live on the ground in all of those ways. Abandoning a spirituality that was about up, and away into some heavenly place removed from these earthly snares, to living on the earth where it's so good and so interesting and so vital and so life-giving. And I learned about the limits of intellect, because depression is not something you can think your way out of, no matter what your IQ is or what degrees you have. So living a grounded life is, I think, a life lived, more likely to be lived in love, because you can be like Thomas Merton on the corner of 4th and Walnut, right? In that famous story about Merton's revelation that thank God he was like a man among other men, or a person among other people. He wasn't set apart specially in a cloister for some extraordinary, rare, holy purpose. He was just here to experience others shining like the sun and to be part of the shining himself. And I'm not referring to Jack Nicholson's version of The Shining, but to Thomas Merton's.
Exactly.
Oh, I love that. I'd never made the Quaker connection there, but he was seeing the radiance shining out of the people on the street of a town in Kentucky and seeing the light. And it was a revelatory experience for him. And that not only changed the way he saw them, as you say, but it changed the way he saw himself. That what a privilege it is just to be part of this wonder of it all.
Amen.
What I feel so happy about at this moment is it feels like in a relatively short amount of time, we've given people so much to think about that I know so many people are going to hit rewind and go back and listen again. I almost don't want to add too much more, but we've looked into two different areas. One, how you engaged in conversation in your home with someone with whom you disagreed, and then how you had to come to see yourself with a certain kind of grace and a softened gaze, let's say it that way, as you had to accept your depressed self as yourself, not a mistake or a failure on your part. But I wonder just if you have anything in closing that you might want to say to people who right now are at a place where they are really either angry at someone else or frustrated with some other category or label of people, or are really down on themselves. They may recently have had to come to terms with a horrible mistake they've made, or a way they've really hurt someone, or they've confronted something in themselves that doesn't feel like it ever is going to change.
I feel very deeply for the people that you've just described. I know they're out there because I've been there myself, been there, done that. And so the fellow feeling of empathy is very deep in me, and I don't want in any way to be glib about my response, because these are serious issues. I am reminded of a Quaker story from way, way back when William Penn, who was a soldier in the King's Army before he came over here and established Pennsylvania, saw George Fox, the founder of Quakerism, the co-founder of Quakerism, along with a woman whose name escapes me at the moment, which is terrible, but I'm 86, so cut me some slack, just like I'm doing for myself at the moment.
That's right. That's right.
And William Penn said to George Fox, "I've heard your preaching. I am convinced. I am called to be a Quaker, but I'm a soldier in the King's Army. How long, when must I lay down my sword?" And George Fox's response was, wear it as long as thou can, which there's such wisdom in that. He didn't say, well, take it off right now if what you're saying is true. If it's horse hockey, then whatever, I don't care. He was saying the weight of your sword, the weight of your anger, the weight of your grief, carry it as long as you can, but pay attention to what it's doing to you. Pay attention to the price you're paying for continuing to wear it, for continuing to cling to your wound, to your anger, as if there were no other way forward. For many people, I would say, consider what you would do if someone in a condition similar to you came to you for counsel. And you would say, forgive yourself. You're a good person. This is not the whole of your life. Yes, it was a screw up, but it's not a terminal screw up. There aren't any terminal screw ups. We're just all living as best we can. And sometimes it doesn't go very well. The one more thing I would say, which is a lot with me at age 86, is that I can't imagine a sadder way to die than realizing that I never showed up on the face of the earth, trusting that other people could deal with who I really am as I really am. If I die unable to say, I am all of the above, I am my successes and my screw-ups, I am my light and I am my darkness, I am my gifts and I am the holes in my personality or in my way of being in the world, that means that I never showed up as me. And why else am I here if it isn't to show up as who I really am? What else do I have to offer except the authenticity of my own experience? Who knows who may need to hear the story of my depression or of my failure to be the kind of academic that I set out to be, which is another part of my life story, or of the fact that my vocation didn't really come together in a way that made any sense to me until I was over 50 years of age. And so when I talk to young people these days who are 24 and can't figure out what they want to do, I say, hey, you got a quarter century ahead of you, no problem. You don't have to put the pedal to the metal. So those are always for me of saying, please, please, literally, in God's name, cut yourself slack. God doesn't need to tie you to the stake. Why are you tying yourself to the stake?
Thank you so much. Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much.
Parker, thank you for bringing such gentleness and light. And I'm going to be re-listening to the stories that you told, because that self-compassion is medicine, is light. So thank you so much for being with us today. It's just meant so much to both of us and to everyone listening. Thank you.
Learning How to See will be back in a moment.
Find your breath this holiday season. Join us for free virtual sit meditations live streamed on YouTube on Sunday mornings during Advent. Led by Brian McLaren, Carmen Acevedo-Butcher, James Finley, and Richard Rohr, these weekly community online meditations will explore Father Richard's beloved book, Preparing for Christmas. Join us on November 30th, December 7th, December 14th, and December 21st at 8:30 a.m. Pacific Time. Learn more at cac.org/Advent2025. That's cac.org/ADVENT2025.
I was deeply moved by how calm and kind Parker Palmer is. He shared with us so much wisdom that can help us all experience life calmer, more self-compassionate, and more compassionate to others. His wisdom helps us talk with our own hearts. Let's sit with it together a moment and consider how we can apply it. He said, living with the mind of Christ is living with eyes that see through love. And he admitted, it's something I work on a lot every day, have for a long time. It has a lot to do with what we pay attention to. It's a long-term mission, he said, of overcoming what George Fox called the sea of darkness. Parker says what drew him to being a Quaker is that Quakers teach, believe, and act on the notion that everyone has God in them, the inner teacher, inner light, inner truth always calling to us. But, he gently adds, it's very easy for us to get confused about signals coming from within and coming from our culture of empire. He reminds us, too, that we're all light and darkness. We know successes and screw-ups. We are our gifts and the holes in our personality. These can stop us, he says, from showing up as our authentic selves. But why else are we here? Who else will be you? Who else will be me? I know now, at 64, I'm not alone in having not been taught this in the rural Southern Baptist churches of my Southern childhood in Georgia and Alabama. I'm a trauma survivor and suffered for decades as I lived with undiagnosed depression before getting help. That just was not a concept in my family or in my church. Instead, you were seen as weak if you admitted to having any sort of non-physical illness. Instead, I was told by many to pray more and read my Bible more. I even heard a preacher once shout from the pulpit, "Here's how you disappear depression. You take the DE off, you take the I out, get selfless, and then you press on." But I knew. I prayed and read my Bible conscientiously. I wanted to. But I also knew it didn't cure me or take my pain away. So I felt I was less than, somehow malformed inside. I wish then I'd had a Parker Palmer to tell me we all have an inner teacher whose guidance is more reliable than anything we can get from a doctrine, ideology, collective belief system, institution, or leader. And our deepest calling is to grow into our own authentic selfhood. As we do, we'll not only find the joy every human being seeks, we'll also find our path of authentic service in the world. What is one way you and I can pay attention to our own inner teacher, inner light, inner truth? How can we listen to that kind voice within and then share this kindness with others? Do we sit with a sweet cat or dog or bird? Do we take a walk, look out the window, journal, pat a tree, call a friend, sit or walk with and steep in a scripture verse, draw, dance, sing, sway, help someone in some way, encourage another, wash dishes, be kind to the staff at the post office? As Parker Palmer reminds us, it's not about what you say. It's about creating a space where every person can hear and discover and listen to their own voice. May God show us the unique to each and held in common path. And may we remember and be grateful we're on it together. There is a chapter in the Christian scriptures written by an early Christian leader named Paul. It is, many people feel, the most profound, most revolutionary, and most beautiful passage in all his writings.
We would like to read 1 Corinthians 13 slowly right now, and then we will focus on one section. And so we invite you to listen deeply. First Corinthians chapter 13. a translation by Carmen Acevedo-Butcher. If I speak with the tongues of humans and of angels, but do not have love, I am an echoing gong or a ringing cymbal. If I have prophetic gifts and can understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so I can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away everything I own, and if I surrender my body as an offering, but do not have love, I gain nothing.
Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. Love does not brag on itself. It is not inflated by disdain. It is not rude. It is not centered on the separate self. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of evil. It takes no pleasure in injustice, but rejoices in the truth.
Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. Prophecies will eventually be discarded. Speaking in tongues will stop, and knowledge will ultimately be set aside.
For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when we encounter wholeness, the parts will be released. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I understood like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became an adult, I let go of childish ways.
At present, we see unclearly, as in a mirror, but then we will see face to face. Right now, I know imperfectly. Then I will know fully, even as I am fully known. And now remain faith, hope, and love, these three. And the greatest of these is love.
Today, we'd like to focus on the fifth section of this passage. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends.
In this practice of sacred reading or Lectio Divina, we begin with Lectio, which is reading. Then we move to Meditatio, which is a reflection. And often we do this reflection alone, but sometimes we can do the reflection with someone else. And Carmen, I want to share with you my honest reaction to this passage. And that is, this is a section of this chapter I want to argue with.
Good.
Because, for example, love bears all things. Well, I think we've all met people who put up with everything. And I don't want to say that that's always heroic. It feels like instead of bearing with things, sometimes people need to stand up and push back and have some boundaries and say, no, that's too far. And love believes all things. Well, that can sound a little bit like credulity or, naivete. And love hopes all things. I think there's times where we have to say, enough's enough. I don't think this is going to work. And I need to, in a sense, lose hope to now decide what should I do instead. And endures all things. Again, I feel like this could be abused with someone to tell them, for example, a person who's in an abusive relationship to say, well, you just have to endure it, instead of saying, no, you should, leave or file for divorce or call the police or whatever it is. So that's my one of my honest reactions to the passage. I don't know how that sits with you.
No, the same with me. I couldn't have said it any better, because I think if it is taken as a panacea to just accept everything and roll over and have no selfhood and have no safety, then that can get very frightening very quickly. So I'm glad you said that, because I feel just the same.
So I guess this is part of the meditatio. We give ourselves permission to say, this bothers me or this doesn't seem right. But then I love what you always say. We have to give a second look. We have to respect the text enough to give it a second look. And what strikes me is, if I want to have a more sympathetic reading of what Paul's saying, maybe Paul doesn't want to be taken literally here, but he's using language to wake us up. And even if it disturbs us a little bit, and maybe if I try to read it in that way, then I say, okay, then maybe sometimes, maybe most often, we don't bear with enough. We just slam the door and walk away. Most often, we don't have enough faith in other people. We don't believe in them enough. Maybe all too often, we give up hope way too soon. And all too often, we won't endure. And for that reason, love ends, love dies, because we reach the limit of what we want to put up with, right? And so when he then says love never ends, maybe the real point is he's trying to say, look, you just don't give up on love, but it wouldn't mean all of those things that I was afraid it might mean.
Right. Because for me, when I sit with this passage and with the difficulties that you brought up that it brings, I might say to God, so love bears all things, and how am I supposed to bear this? Do you know, I might literally bring to God a situation where I'm like, how am I to bear this? And I'm supposed to believe all things and hope all things. How in this situation? I would really ask God, if this is the case, what am I supposed to find here? And just really challenge God to show up in my life. It's like our friend Jim Finley says, God protects us in nothing, even as God sustains us in all things. So I think these difficulties are precisely what this kind of Lectio helps us with, is to really sit in the difficulties where the love is found.
Let me take that to heart. And then I could imagine a situation. Let's say I have a friend who always is overbearing and he demands too much time or asks too much. It feels like he's overly dependent on me, and I'm bothered by it. So I bear it for a long, long time. And I believe in his good intentions for a long time. And I hope that things will get better for a long time. And I endure a lot. And then I might reach a point where I might say, you know what? If I keep letting this go on, it's actually bad for me, but it's also bad for him. Because if I really care about him, he needs some feedback that he's demanding too much and pushing too hard. So maybe when I feel that tension and I've borne all that I could bear and believed all I could believe and hope all I could hope and endured all I could endure, maybe now I love him enough that if I speak up, I'll speak with love rather than just slamming the door or ghosting him online or whatever. I'll be able to keep loving, but it's in that tension that I'll find out what needs to be done.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, because it's like there's no longer a this or that. There's the third way or the fourth way or the fifth way. And so that when you do talk with your friend, it is both truer, what you might say, and kinder somehow.
Well, that helps us then move to the next part of the Lectio Divina process, oratio, which is prayer. So what we'd like to do is invite you to take some time now to turn what we've talked about and to turn the 5 elements of this short passage, to turn them into a prayer that relates to your life today.
Love bears all things. Love, help me bear with this without becoming bitter or burned out.
Love believes all things. Love help me not become cynical on the one hand or be naive on the other hand.
Love hopes all things. Love, please help me hope without being in denial.
Love endures all things. Love, help me not slam the door and walk away angry.
Love never ends. Whatever happens, love, please keep within me a loving heart.
We now invite you to listen to this selection a final time. And then in the brief silence that follows, we invite you to let this wisdom be present to you. And we invite you to be present to this wisdom. We thank you for investing this time in learning how to see, whether it's your first time with us or you've been with us for many episodes and many seasons. We trust that each episode will send thousands of us back into our daily lives, with love being the lens through which we see everyone and everything everywhere.
Big thanks to Corey Wayne, Dorothy Abrams, and Vanessa Yee, who produced Learning How to See. Thanks to April Stace for her musical support. This episode was edited and mixed by the team at Sound On, Sound Off. To learn more about their work, visit soundonsoundoff.com. Thanks to the Center for Action and Contemplation for making Learning How to See possible. And special thanks to you for your investment of time.
Do you feel called to walk a more contemplative path? The Center for Action and Contemplation is an educational nonprofit supporting the journey of inner transformation. Our programs and resources will help grow your consciousness, deepen your prayer practice, and strengthen your compassionate engagement with the world. Learn more about our resources, such as publications, podcasts, email series, and events at www.cac.org.